For years, my cousins called me the charity case of the family. This year, at the reunion, they finally met the real me. And let's just say, karma showed up wearing heels. Stick with me while I share my story. And if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. It had been 11 years since I last stepped foot in the Whitmore family estate in North Carolina. The long gravel driveway, the white columns, the smell of the pine trees. It all came rushing back like a memory I had tried hard to bury. My mother had begged me to let the past go. But some things you don't forget. Not when they carved themselves into your teenage years and followed you into adulthood. The Whitmore family reunions had always been grand events. Matching t-shirts, catered food, group photos. It was supposed to be about love and connection. But for me, it was the place where humiliation wore a friendly smile. I could still hear Claire's voice calling me, Maddie the charity girl, every time I reached for dessert, or Vanessa laughing when she saw my worn-out shoes. Ryan wasn't any better. He was the one who once told me my dad left us nothing but debt. When my father died, everything changed. Mom worked double shifts to keep food on the table, while my cousins went to private schools and bragged about ski trips. I grew up watching them live a life I only saw on TV. They had family portraits in gold frames. I had a single photo of my dad taped to my dresser. Back then, I thought they were better than me. Now I knew better. Driving through those same gates as an adult felt strange. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, and my stomach twisted. I wasn't coming here to show off. I wasn't even coming here for revenge. I was coming here for closure, for the quiet kind of payback that doesn't need words, just presence. The invitation had arrived 2 months ago, written in my Aunt Margaret's looping handwriting. She said it would be special this year. I almost threw it away. But something in me wanted to walk through those doors again, not as the scared, quiet girl I used to be, but as the woman who had learned her worth far away from their judgment. As the house came into view, I took a deep breath and smiled. My heart beat fast, not from fear, but from the thrill of finally facing the ghosts I'd left behind. I'd spent years building a life no one in that house believed I could have. They didn't know who I'd become, and I liked it that way. Let them think I was still the poor cousin. Let them whisper. Because this time, I wasn't the one who'd walk away feeling small. This time they would. The memories came back to me in pieces, like old photographs I never wanted to look at again. Growing up, every family gathering felt like walking into a trap dressed as a celebration. I would stand in the hallway, clutching my mom's hand, trying to smile while the Whitmores paraded around in their expensive clothes. My cousins always made sure I knew I didn't belong. Claire, the oldest, was the leader of their little pack. She was beautiful, popular, and cruel in a quiet, polished way. She didn't need to raise her voice to make me feel small. One Christmas, I remember her leaning over the table, pretending to compliment my dress, then adding, "Oh, how sweet, it looks like something from a thrift store." She wasn't wrong. It was from a thrift store, but the way she said it made my cheeks burn. Everyone laughed, even Uncle Thomas. My mom kept smiling, pretending not to hear, but her eyes told me she did. Vanessa wasn't as sharp as Claire, but she followed her lead. She had this fake sweet tone. She used to say things like, "Oh, Maddie, you're so brave to wear something so simple." And Ryan, the only boy among them, used to call me charity case every time I came around. He'd drop quarters in front of me and say, "Here, Maddie, you can buy yourself something nice." I would pick them up just to stop the laughter, pretending I didn't care, but those moments stayed with me for years. Then there was my Uncle Thomas, their father. He loved being the center of attention and used humor as a weapon. He would tell stories about how the Brooks girls were the hard-working ones, in a tone that wasn't praise. Once at Thanksgiving, he said, "If you ever need a lesson in surviving on a dime, just ask my niece Maddie. She's got it down to a science." The adults laughed. I excused myself and hid in the bathroom until dinner was over. But the worst memory was prom night. My mom had saved for months to buy me a dress, a pale blue one she found on sale. I felt beautiful for the first time. Claire, of course, showed up at the same pre-prom gathering wearing something glittering and expensive. When I went to get some punch, she accidentally bumped into me. The red drink splashed all over my dress. She gasped and said, "Oh no, I didn't see you there." Everyone saw her smirk before she turned away. I went home before the dance even started. After that night, I made myself a promise. They would never see me cry again. I stopped trying to fit in with them. I focused on school, on work, on getting out. Every insult, Every snide comment became fuel. I didn't know what my life would look like then, but I knew one thing. Someday, I would walk back into that house and not feel ashamed. Someday, I would make them see me differently. When I left home at 18, I had nothing but a small suitcase, a bus ticket, and a tired mother's blessing. I remember standing at the station with her arms around me, both of us pretending not to cry. She told me, "Make a life that makes you proud, Maddie." I didn't know what that life would look like, but I knew I had to find it. The first few years were rough. I worked mornings at a diner and evenings at a small warehouse, loading boxes until my arms ached. Most nights, I came home too tired to eat. But I refused to give up. I saved every dollar I could and enrolled in community college. I didn't have fancy clothes or friends with connections, but I had determination. I studied business and logistics, learning how companies moved goods across the country. Something about it fascinated me. The order, the coordination, the quiet power behind it all. After graduation, I landed a job at a small freight company. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved the work. I started as an assistant and paid attention to everything. The routes, the contracts, the drivers, even the way the owners handled clients. Within 3 years, I was running operations for half the team. People noticed my efficiency, my calm under pressure, and how I treated everyone, from truck drivers to CEOs, with the same respect. I remembered how people once looked down on my mother for her job, and I promised myself I'd never treat anyone that way. At 28, I met Eric Hale. He was charming, intelligent, and had the same hunger to build something real. He worked in logistics too, but at a higher level, managing large-scale freight operations. We started as colleagues, sharing ideas about how the industry could be better, fairer, more human. Late nights in the office turned into coffee dates, then something deeper. He believed in me even before I believed in myself. Together, we decided to start our own company, Brooks and Hale Logistics. The early days were brutal. We worked out of a small rented office, sometimes using our personal savings to keep things afloat. But our honesty and reliability caught attention. Clients trusted us because we delivered what we promised. Word spread, and within 5 years, we went from 2 people and 1 laptop to a nationwide firm with hundreds of employees and major contracts. Today, Brooks and Hale Logistics is valued in the millions. We employ people from small towns, single parents, and anyone willing to work hard. People like my mother once was. Even with all the success, I've stayed grounded. I still drive a modest car, still visit mom every weekend, still donate quietly to local shelters. When the invitation for the reunion arrived, Eric told me, "You should go. Not to prove anything, just to show them you're at peace." He meant it kindly, but part of me wanted them to see me. Not the poor girl they once pitied, but the woman who built her own name from nothing. One evening, I came home from work to find an envelope sitting on my kitchen counter. My mother had dropped it off earlier that day. The handwriting on the front was neat and familiar, Aunt Margaret's. My heart sank the moment I saw it. She rarely wrote to me, and when she did, it was never personal. I sat down, opened it carefully, and read the words that made my chest tighten. "You are invited to the Whitmore family reunion. This year's gathering will be special. We'd love to have you join us." For a moment, I just stared at the letter. The words felt harmless, but I knew better. The Whitmore family didn't do special, unless it was about showing off. I could already picture it, Claire's husband, probably just promoted, standing beside her while she bragged about their new country club membership. Vanessa, with her fake laugh, talking about the luxury house she'd just bought. Ryan flashing his latest sports car keys. It would be another parade of success and status. The same kind of gathering that once made me feel invisible. I folded the letter and tried to ignore the heaviness in my chest. My first thought was simple. I'm not going. I didn't owe them anything. But that night, while Eric and I were having dinner, I found myself telling him about it. He listened quietly, his eyes soft and understanding. When I finished, he smiled and said, "Maybe this is your time to go back, not to prove anything, but to close the door for good." I hesitated. The idea of walking into that mansion again made my stomach twist. I remembered the looks, the whispers, the way they used to talk about my mother like she was a mistake in their family tree. But Eric was right. I wasn't that girl anymore. I had nothing to fear. Maybe going back would finally set me free. "I'll go," I said finally, though my voice wavered. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Then I'm going with you." I nodded, secretly relieved. Having him there would make it easier to face them. But I decided something right then. I wouldn't tell anyone who he really was. They didn't need to know he was the co-founder and CEO of our company. And I wouldn't tell them what I did either. I wanted to see how they treated me without knowing about the success they'd once said I'd never have. For the next few weeks, I tried not to think about it, but the closer the reunion got, the more restless I became. Old memories kept sneaking into my mind. I wondered if Aunt Margaret really wanted to see me, or if I was just being invited out of obligation. Still, I picked out a simple dress, booked a modest rental car, and told Eric we'd leave Friday morning. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew one thing. This time, I was walking in on my own terms. The reunion was being held at the Whitmore family estate, the same place where I'd spent years feeling like an outsider. As Eric and I drove up the long driveway, I could already see the crowd gathering in the yard. Laughter filled the air, and fancy cars lined both sides of the entrance, shiny, expensive, and loud. My little rental looked completely out of place among them, but I didn't care. I parked near the back, took a deep breath, and told myself to stay calm. The moment I stepped out, I felt the eyes. The first to notice me was Vanessa. She stood near the porch, holding a glass of wine, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my first car. Her smile was sharp. "Maddie Brooks," she said, dragging out my name like a joke. "Oh, you made it. I wasn't sure you'd come." Her eyes flicked toward my car, and she added with a smirk, "Cute ride." Very practical. Before I could answer, Ryan appeared from behind her, his grin wide. Well, if it isn't our hard-working cousin. You take a day off from whatever desk job you've got." His tone was playful, but the sting behind it was clear. I forced a small smile. "Something like that," I said, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Eric stepped beside me, placing a gentle hand on my back. I could feel him watching them, calm but alert. He didn't need to say anything. His presence alone was enough to keep me grounded. Claire made her entrance a few minutes later, perfectly put together as always. She walked over like she owned the place, her perfume filling the air before she even spoke. "Maddie," she exclaimed, giving me a quick hug that felt more like a performance. "Everyone, this is my cousin Maddie, the one who used to live in that little trailer park off Main Street. Remember?" Her voice was cheerful, but her words hit like a slap. A few people chuckled politely. My smile didn't move. I just nodded and said, "Nice to see everyone again." That's all. No anger, no comeback, just calm. And that seemed to bother her even more. Then Aunt Margaret appeared on the porch. Her silver hair was perfectly styled, and her expression was as cold as I remembered. She gave me a long, slow look from head to toe. "Madeline," she said finally, "you look well." The pause before that last word was deliberate. She didn't hug me, didn't even smile. Just turned and walked away, signaling the staff to continue serving drinks. As the evening went on, the whispers followed me wherever I went. People stared, whispered, compared. But I stayed composed, letting every comment roll off my back. Inside, though, I could feel the old hurt rising. Not enough to break me, but enough to remind me why I was there. Every jab, every smirk, every fake compliment only made me more certain that I had done the right thing by coming. This time, I wasn't here to fit in. I was here to finish what they started years ago. Dinner was served on the long mahogany table in the formal dining room. The same one where I had once sat at the far end, close to the kitchen door, while everyone else laughed and toasted at the center. The candles were lit, the silverware gleamed, and the air was thick with the smell of roasted meat and expensive perfume. I took a seat near the middle, right across from Claire. Eric sat beside me, calm as ever, quietly observing. The conversation started like any other Whitmore gathering, full of bragging. Vanessa went first, showing off pictures on her phone. "We just finished the renovations on the new place," she said proudly. "Imported tiles from Italy, custom lighting from New York. You should see the walk-in closet." She didn't look at me directly, but her voice carried enough edge to make sure I heard every word. Ryan jumped in next, laughing as he pulled out his car keys. Speaking of upgrades, I finally traded in the old Benz for a 2025 Escalade. Fully loaded. You should see how it glides on the highway. He tossed his keys on the table like they were part of the decor. Claire sipped her wine slowly, waiting for the perfect moment to steer the spotlight back to herself. "You know," she said, "I was telling David the other day that some people are just born with a sense of refinement. My mother always had it, and I guess it just runs in the family." She smiled sweetly at me. Not everyone's parents understood that, of course. Some people are more practical. It was a dig at my mother, clear as day. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I stayed silent. Eric looked at me briefly, as if asking if I was okay. I gave a small nod. I wasn't going to let them get a reaction out of me. As dinner went on, the stories got louder and the laughter more forced. I mostly listened, smiling politely when needed. I could tell my quietness was starting to bother them. Claire, especially, couldn't stand not being in control of the conversation. Finally, she leaned forward and asked, "So, Maddie, what have you been up to all these years? We never hear from you." I shrugged lightly. "Just been busy working." She tilted her head, pretending to look impressed. "Oh, where at? Probably one of those call centers downtown, huh?" Her tone was playful, but her eyes were sharp, testing me. I smiled softly and said, "Something like that." Then I went back to cutting my food. The table went quiet for a moment. They weren't expecting me to be so calm. I could feel Claire watching me, waiting for me to defend myself, to explain, to give her something to mock. But I didn't. I let her fill the silence with her own assumptions. As the plates were cleared and dessert was served, I sat back in my chair, listening to them talk about vacations, promotions, and shopping trips. They had no idea that I was quietly letting them dig their own holes, word by word. I wasn't there to prove anything, not yet. My moment would come, and when it did, they wouldn't even see it coming. The next day, the family decided to have dinner at the resort restaurant nearby. Aunt Margaret had arranged a private dining area overlooking the lake, complete with candles and soft music. It was supposed to be a celebration, Claire's husband's promotion, Vanessa's new house, and the Whitmore family legacy, as Aunt Margaret liked to call it. I went along quietly, keeping my calm smile in place. Eric sat beside me, his hand occasionally brushing mine under the table, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this anymore. Halfway through dinner, just as the waiter brought out the main course, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Well, I'll be. Maddie Brooks, is that you?" I turned around, surprised. Standing there was Mr. Carmichael, one of my biggest clients, a kind, older man who owned a regional freight line. He was dressed casually, clearly on vacation, but his face lit up the moment he saw me. "What are the odds?" he said, walking over with a big grin. "I was just telling my wife last week about the woman who saved our entire business." The whole table went silent. Everyone's eyes turned toward me. Claire blinked, clearly confused. "You know, Maddie?" she asked, her tone cautious. Mr. Carmichael chuckled. "Know her? She's the reason Carmichael Freight is still running. When that supply chain mess hit last year, her company, Brooks and Hale Logistics, came through when no one else could. Smartest move I ever made was trusting her team. You could have heard a pin drop." I smiled politely. "It was nothing really," I said softly, but he waved his hand. "Nothing. You saved us. You and your partner run the most efficient logistics firm in the Southeast. Everyone in the industry knows Brooks and Hale. You're a legend, Maddie." I could see it then, the way Claire's face froze mid-smile. Vanessa's glass stopped halfway to her lips. Ryan leaned forward, squinting like he wasn't sure he'd heard right. Aunt Margaret's fork clinked softly against her plate. Mr. Carmichael looked around the table, realizing everyone was staring. "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt your dinner. Just had to say hello to the woman who turned our company around." He gave my shoulder a friendly pat and left with a cheerful wave. The silence he left behind was heavy. Vanessa was the first to move. She grabbed her phone under the table, pretending to check a message. I could see her fingers moving quickly. A moment later, she nearly choked on her drink. "Oh my God," she whispered, staring at her screen. "Brooks and Hale Logistics. Maddie, this is your company." I didn't answer right away. I just took a sip of my water and smiled. Eric sat back, hiding his amusement. Claire tried to recover, laughing weakly. "Wow, I had no idea you were into logistics," she said, as if the word tasted strange to her. I met her gaze calmly. "Yeah," I said, "it's been keeping me pretty busy." No one spoke after that. The air was thick with shock and discomfort. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to explain. For once, the truth had walked in on its own, and it spoke louder than anything I could have ever said. Claire tried to laugh, though it came out shaky. "Oh, you mean that's your company?" she said, looking at me with a forced smile. "I thought maybe you were just someone's assistant or secretary or something." She waved her hand, pretending it was a harmless mistake, but everyone could hear the edge in her voice. I kept my eyes on her and said quietly, "No, Claire. I built it. From nothing. The same nothing you all used to laugh at. My tone wasn't angry, just calm, steady. The kind of calm that makes people listen. Vanessa shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. Ryan chuckled awkwardly and tried to lighten the mood. Well, hey, guess it paid off, huh? I mean, who would have thought the girl from the trailer park would turn into a business tycoon? He grinned, but his joke fell flat. Before I could say anything, Eric spoke. His voice was low, but carried across the table. You mean my fiancé, he said simply. The room froze. And business partner, he added, resting his hand gently over mine. We built Brooks and Hale together. Claire blinked, completely caught off guard. Fiancé, she repeated. Vanessa's mouth dropped open. Aunt Margaret sat very still, her lips pressed tight, eyes darting between me and Eric as if trying to piece it together. Eric looked around the table. Maddie doesn't talk much about what she's achieved, he said, his tone calm but firm. But she's one of the sharpest, most determined people I've ever known. You all may not see it, but I've watched her fight for everything she has. Every contract, every client, every late night, she earned it. No one dared interrupt him. Even Ryan stopped fidgeting with his napkin. I turned then, my gaze landing on Aunt Margaret. She was the one who'd always set the tone for how the rest treated me. You always taught me that family means respect, I said softly. That we lift each other up. But I had to learn that lesson from strangers, not from you. Her face tightened, but she didn't speak. For once, she had nothing to say. Vanessa looked down, pretending to check her phone again. Claire tried to recover her smile, but failed. Ryan reached for his drink, clearly wishing the evening would just end. The silence around the table was heavy, not awkward, but full of realization. All their words, all their judgments, suddenly meant nothing. I looked at each of them once more before setting down my fork. I didn't come here to prove anything, I said. I just came because I thought maybe things had changed. No one responded. The clinking of silverware and soft music in the background seemed louder than ever. Eric gave my hand a reassuring squeeze. Ready to go? He asked. I nodded, standing up slowly. The family sat frozen as we walked out, leaving their perfect dinner and fake smiles behind. For the first time, the silence didn't feel cold, it felt like peace. The silence after Maddie's words stretched across the room. No one seemed to know what to say. The only sound was the faint clinking of glasses and a distant song playing from the restaurant speakers. Vanessa was the first to react. Her eyes filled with tears, and she quickly grabbed her purse. Excuse me, she whispered, almost tripping over her chair as she rushed out. Ryan muttered something under his breath and followed, his face red with frustration and embarrassment. Claire sat frozen for a moment, her expression shifting between anger and panic. She tried to laugh again, but her voice trembled. Maddie, come on, she said, forcing a smile. We were just joking around. You know how family is. We didn't mean anything by it. She reached for her glass, trying to look composed, but her hand shook slightly. Maddie looked at her calmly. I know exactly how family is, she said softly. That was all. No anger, no shouting, just truth. Aunt Margaret cleared her throat, breaking the tension. Now, she said, her voice strained. Let's not make this bigger than it is. They didn't mean it that way, Maddie. You know how young people talk sometimes. Maddie turned toward her aunt, giving her a small, polite smile. I do know, she replied. And I've forgiven it long ago. The older woman seemed taken aback. Forgiven? She repeated, as if the word confused her. Maddie nodded slowly. Yes, because all those years of being laughed at, of being treated like I didn't belong, they made me stronger. They taught me to rely on myself, to work harder, and to build something no one could take from me. She paused, letting her words settle. So really, thank you. Aunt Margaret blinked rapidly, unsure how to respond. Claire looked away, biting her lip. The few other relatives at the table stayed silent, pretending to check their phones or sip their drinks, anything to avoid eye contact. Eric stood quietly beside Maddie, watching her with quiet pride. He didn't have to say a word. She had handled everything with grace. Maddie picked up her clutch and smiled one last time. Thank you for dinner, she said, her tone warm but distant. It was good seeing everyone again. She didn't wait for them to respond. She simply turned and walked out with Eric by her side. Heads turned as they passed through the restaurant. Not because of what she wore or how she looked, but because of the quiet strength that surrounded her. Outside, the night air felt cool and freeing. Maddie took a deep breath and let it out slowly. For the first time in years, she felt no weight on her shoulders. Eric slipped his arm around her. You handled that beautifully, he said. She smiled, a genuine one this time. I didn't need revenge, she said softly. Just closure. As they walked toward their car, the laughter and noise of the reunion faded behind them, replaced by the sound of peace, the sound of moving on. The sun was barely up when Maddie and Eric packed their things and checked out of the resort. The parking lot was quiet, the air still carrying the faint smell of last night's rain. Maddie slid into the passenger seat, buckled her belt, and watched as the old white gates of the Whitmore family estate disappeared in the rearview mirror. She didn't feel angry anymore. For the first time in years, she felt light, as if she had finally put down a weight she'd been carrying since childhood. Eric glanced at her and smiled softly. You okay? He asked. She nodded. More than okay, she said. I think I finally closed that chapter. They drove in silence for a while, the road stretching out before them, lined with tall oak trees. The same roads Maddie once took to visit her cousins now felt different. Back then, every trip filled her with dread, knowing she'd be reminded of what she didn't have. But now it was just a road, nothing more. She had outgrown that pain. When they stopped at a small diner for breakfast, Maddie looked out the window at the calm morning traffic. She thought about her mom, about how hard she'd worked, how much she'd endured. Maddie wished her mother could see her now, see how far she'd come. She whispered quietly, We made it, Mom. Eric reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You don't owe them anything, he said. I know, she replied. And that's the best part. A few days later, after returning home to Charlotte, Maddie came back from a long day at the office to find an envelope in her mail. The handwriting was neat and careful, Aunt Margaret's. Maddie hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside was a short letter written on cream-colored paper. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Aunt Margaret admitted she had been wrong. Wrong to judge, wrong to ignore, wrong to let the cousins treat Maddie the way they did. She said she was proud of what Maddie had accomplished and hoped someday they could start over, even just as distant family. Maddie read the letter twice. There was a time when she would have cried, or maybe even felt vindicated. But not now. She just felt calm. She folded the letter neatly and placed it in her drawer, next to an old photo of her and her mother at the diner where her mom used to work. She didn't hate them anymore. Hate was too heavy to carry. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Maddie knew she would never let those people close enough to hurt her again. That night, as she sat on her porch with Eric, the stars glimmering overhead, she smiled to herself. Her revenge had never been about money or showing off. It was about proving, to them and to herself, that she could rise without their approval. She had become everything they said she couldn't be. And that, she realized, was enough.